All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be continuing down the path of the Red Mage by looking at the Sword Dancer combat style. If you're wondering where in the world did the Red Mage come from, if you look in the description down below, there's a link to the D&D Cross Final Fantasy XIV Reddit, where you can actually download this supplement called 5th Edition D&D Cross Final Fantasy XIV Classes and Races Compendium. It basically has all of the classes and races from Final Fantasy XIV and translates them into 5th Edition D&D, and they're really cool. I've been going through a bunch of them. I think this is the 4th class I've covered, so definitely check that out. Also, if you're enjoying this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon and turn notifications on. All of those are really important to other people getting to see this. YouTube will put this video in recommended videos for other people watching if a lot of people like it, and if a lot of people subscribe and things like that. All of those make it easier for it to go out, so please, it definitely helps. That being said, let's dive into the class itself. Now, quick refresher on 5th edition class design. In 5th edition, every class is designed to play very, very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, each class has these things that we call defining features. These are things that are either unique to the class or abilities that maybe other classes get, but this class gets it much earlier than everyone else, or they can use it in a way that other classes can't. In order for something to be considered a defining feature, it has to show up within the first 2 levels. For the Red Mage, it has 2 defining features, which one basically fuels the other. The first defining feature is flare points. This is their limited resource. You see that a lot in these Final Fantasy XIV classes. Some of them work really well. Some of them don't. We've discussed quite a few of them before, so it's not a huge thing. The other defining feature of the Red Mage is what's called dual cast. Basically, they can burn a flare point to cast a spell that has a casting time of 1 action as a bonus action. Very similar to Quicken Spell from the Sorcerer. The difference being they can only dual cast the spell up to 4th level. So there is some limitations on it so that it's not massively overpowered. And it's not taking any thunder away from the Sorcerer, who won't get the ability to quicken spells until the 3rd level. That being said, let's dive into the Sword Dancer. Now, I mentioned in my last video, other than extra attack, there's nothing really built into the base class that encourages you to mix magic and swordplay. Despite the fact that that's kind of what the Red Mage itself is built around, depending on which iteration you're talking about, there's more or less melee combat, depending on the game. But even in Final Fantasy XIV, where your melee combat doesn't happen a ton, it still happens relatively regularly, and it's part of your damage rotation that does your most powerful spells. I'm assuming, or I was assuming when I read it, that we would find subclasses that would put a much heavier emphasis on melee combat, and that's what the Sword Dancer does. But it actually takes another aspect of the Final Fantasy XIV Red Mage, which is kind of their hyper mobility. Red Mage has 2 abilities in Final Fantasy XIV. I believe they're called Corpse of Corpse or Core. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but what that allows them to do is it basically charges forward and you do an attack on enemy to basically get you into melee range. You do your combo, and then you use another ability called Displacement, which launches you back. I think it's 30 yalms in that, which is their equivalent of yards, I believe. So in 14, when you are playing the red mage, to get you into melee range, you will dash forward and poke, do your combo, flip backwards, and then go back to casting. And it makes it a lot of fun. You're a lot more mobile than other casters because of your dual casting and the fact that you can jump in and out of melee really, really quickly. Yeah, the Sword Dancer kind of really focuses on those abilities. Let's dive into the actual features. At second level, you get what's called Corpse of Corpse. As a bonus action, you spend 1 flare point and select 1 target within 30 feet of you. You move in a straight line towards that target, stopping at the first creature you encounter in your path. This movement does not provoke attacks of opportunity. You make a weapon attack against the target, dealing a bonus 1d8 piercing damage if your attack lands. So there's a lot about this. First things first, it's additional movement. It's 30 feet of additional movement. So this is effectively doubling your movement speed as long as you have a target to attack. It doesn't provoke opportunity attacks, so you can use this to get out of bad situations. It does mention... it just says 1 target, which generally isn't used. Generally, you say 1 creature. Targets... I don't know if this is what was intended, but targets... basically implies that you can actually aim your corpse at anything. You could aim it at an area of empty space if you wanted to, because that's a target. You just have to target a certain space. And it does mention the first creature you encounter, so it does make a differentiation between target and creature. So this literally is... movement wherever you want. It doesn't have to be specified on a creature or anything like that. So if you're surrounded by enemies and need to get away, you can corpse away. The only issue you're going to have is the first creature you encounter. And that itself is a little bit, I guess, undefined is the best term for it. Stopping at the first creature you encounter, does that mean going past a creature? Does that mean a creature that stops your movement? From what's written here, if this was brought to my attention at the table, I would rule that it is the first creature that is within melee range of you. The first creature you encounter is going to be the first creature you can make a melee attack. So if you are... effectively, you have you here and you have a creature here and then you have another creature here and you try and go this way, well, as soon as you move 5 feet, you're going to be able to encounter, quote unquote, a creature because you have another creature right here. So that does limit it a little bit. If it's meant to be the first creature that's directly in your path, you do need to state that it has to be the first creature in your path of travel, because it does mention you have to travel in a straight line, so you can't like move around creatures as you do this. It has to be a straight line. If the intention was that it has to be the first creature you quote unquote that stops your movement, it has to say that. Otherwise, for this, it does mean anytime you quote unquote encounter a creature, which I would rule to mean anytime you're within 5 feet of a creature after moving at least 5 feet, you're going to have to stop your corpse and immediately attack that creature. So that is a limiting factor to it. With the abilities that you get later on, I don't think it's a massive limitation. So yeah, and the fact that it's a target and not a creature. Thank you, phone. the fact that it's a target and not a creature, I think that's not the worst limitation to this at all. Now, this does use your bonus action, so you can't use it the same turn that you use dual cast. So you do kind of want to make a choice in that idea of, do I want to burn, and it also uses a flare point, do I want to burn a flare point to cast up to a 4th level spell, or do I want to use a flare point to move, attack, and to do extra damage all in one? The thing that's nice about it is it says dealing a bonus 1d8 piercing damage if your attack lands. Because it is bonus damage that is die based, that means if you get a crit, that damage is going to double as well. So Corpse of Corpse becomes very, very useful if you have a Dragoon in your party and they use the ability that increases your crit range. This becomes a very, very attractive ability to use because you're getting all that extra damage. You're getting in close, especially if you do have a weapon like a Flame Tongue or an Icebrand weapon, where you can go in, do extra damage with every attack. Your bonus action is now an attack, and you still have your action to either cast a spell, which does open you up to being able to use touch-based spells, which is always nice, or you can use your just regular attack, or once you get to 5th level, you can use extra attack and effectively get 3 attacks in a round without having to dual wield. So yeah, Corpse to Corpse, a lot of different things it gives. It's a hyper mobility thing. It also gets you away from opportunity attacks depending on the situation. So if it can get you out of situations just as easy as it can get you into to them, and it does extra damage. Like, it's just really, really nice, and it gives you a reason to not always use your flare points for dual cast. And again, good class design gives you choices. Bad class design gives you an obviously superior choice and an obviously inferior choice. And there are going to be instances where it's in your best interest to dual cast a spell, and there are going to be instances where it's in your best interest to Corpse to Corpse. Like, they're going to have situations where both are equally useful, and that's what you want in good class design. Moving up to 6th level, you get Heroic Charm. You may spend 1 flare point to re-roll any charisma-based ability check. You gain proficiency in a charisma skill of your choice. So this is interesting for 2 reasons. One, you get proficiency in a charisma-based skill, so that's always nice. Charisma-based skills are effectively deception, persuasion, and performance. All 3 have a lot of different uses. There really isn't a bad one to choose, other than performance in general, depending on your DM, can be a little bit more limited. But if you're a creative player, you can find ways to use performance in interesting ways. Really good example. I can't even remember what there's a background that's like performer or something similar to that. And there is an alternate version of it in the player's handbook called Gladiator, where you are specifically a performer that specializes in gladiatorial combat. Basically, combat that looks flashy and things like that to incite a crowd to excitement. And it specifically mentions being able to use your performance skill to make your combat look flashier when you are using your background feature. And so, you can use your, especially with the fact that red mages are meant to be kind of really flashy. There's an emote that every class can use in Final Fantasy XIV called Battle Stance and Victory Pose. And I can't remember which one it is for red mages, but one of them has them taking their rapier and just kind of twirling it around and throwing it up in the air and catching it as it spins. It is super, super cool. That, to me, would be a performance-based check around using your weapon that you could use for a number of different things. So never underestimate the value of a good charisma check in a number of different situations. Also, it says you may spend 1 flare point to reroll any charisma-based ability check. One thing it doesn't say, which generally you see in every ability like this, is you must use the second roll. The reason that's put in place is it prevents doing something that I actually did in a game, because I think I was using a previous version of the player's handbook that didn't have this thing in it. But at, I think, 14th or 13th level, monks get the ability to burn a key point to re-roll saving throws. Any saving throw you can re-roll. In later editions, and it might have been in the first edition and I just didn't realize it, it says you must use the second roll. Because what happened was, in this one encounter, I kept failing these saves, and so I re-rolled it like 4 or 5 times because I was a 13th level monk. I had tons of key points. And it slowed down combat to a crawl because they had to keep waiting for me to re-roll. No, I'm going to re-roll again. No, I'm going to re-roll again. This doesn't have that. Now, you have half the number of flare points as you do key points, and flare point translation can be really, really useful. The fact that you can dual cast up to a 4th level spell means burning point after point after point becomes very significantly less useful when it can translate to you're burning 4th level spell slots effectively. But there's nothing in this ability that says you can't do that. So you could burn thing after thing to ensure that you make your charisma check. Because charisma checks are not quite as quote-unquote game-breaking as a saving throw, I don't think it really needs that. But Soren, if you're watching this, if you don't want that and you just forgot to put that extra part in, or you didn't realize that's why that part was in there, yeah, add in, you must use the second check, because otherwise it does slow down the game to a crawl as they just keep re-rolling. If they're like me and they can't roll above a 4 to save their life sometimes, this can grind the entire game to a halt as they just keep re-rolling so that they can get that charisma check that they want. So, yeah. Going to the 10th level, you get Displacement. That ability sounds familiar. By spending 1 flare point after taking the action, I don't know why. After taking the attack action, that makes a lot more sense. By spending 1 flare point after taking the attack action, you leap backwards through the air, landing 30 feet in a straight line behind you. You are considered to travel over the heads of medium creatures or smaller, but your travel is stopped by a creature larger than this. This movement does not provoke opportunity attacks. When you take this action, make a ranged spell attack against the target of your attack action, dealing 2d8 plus your charisma modifier, force damage on a hit. There is a lot to this. First things first, you can only do this when you take the attack action. So you are using flare points, which is a defining feature, but displacement cannot be used with dual cast at all. Whereas Corpse to Corpse relies on you kind of choosing, do I want to move and attack? I guess it's basically the opposite of Corpse to Corpse, where your bonus action not only displacement can't be used with spell casting at all. Displacement has to be used on a turn where the only thing you did to do is use melee attacks. Whereas Corpse to Corpse, you can Corpse to Corpse and then use a spell attack, or spell attack and then Corpse to Corpse. So because this requires the attack action, this has to be something you do when you are only doing melee attacks. And to kind of make up for that, it does, again, it allows you to move. So there's that hyper mobility again. And allows you to kind of jump back. No opportunity attacks. You can actually move over medium-sized enemies and smaller. So this is actually even more useful than Corpse to Corpse because it doesn't stop you as soon as you encounter someone. And you get to do a ranged spell attack effectively that does a decent amount of damage. More damage than you're going to do with a melee attack. Effectively doing the same amount of damage you would do with Corpse to Corpse, minus any additional damage you would have from spell effects or magic item abilities that do extra damage on a hit. Again, this really leans into the idea that the Sword Dancer is hyper mobile and will do very, very well with a kind of with a hit and run style attack. And what I mean by that is they can run in, use their attack action to get some damage off, especially if they're already concentrating on something like elemental weapon. They get some extra damage. They use displacement to get out of there, and then they have a full 30 feet. Or if an enemy is already right up against them, they attack, they displace their way out of it, and then they can move even further so the person they just attacked can't get up to them to do a melee attack against them. Or they can move themselves around so that if that target wants to get close enough to it to attack them, it means that they have to go through one of your allies, which is really nice. The other thing that this does is if you are using something like elemental weapon, it's a 3rd level concentration based spell that gives you additional damage, basically a d4 of extra damage every time you attack. Displacement can be used to make sure that you're not running the risk of losing concentration on it. Anytime you take damage while you have a concentration spell on, you have to roll concentration checks, which is basically a Constitution saving throw. In order to avoid that, you can use displacement to basically run up, make your attack, jump away to a point where they're not going to be able to get a good attack on you, maybe jumping over an ally or jumping over maybe a small 5-foot wall or something like that. Just anything, or even just difficult terrain to make it so they can't get to you, so you're not constantly rolling your concentration checks in order to use things like that. So yeah, overall really interesting, really fun ability. Finally, at 14th level, you get Enchanted Blade. After attuning to a one-handed weapon for 1 hour, magical or not, you are able to summon the weapon to your hand as an action. You may spend 1 flare point to deal an additional 2d8 force damage on each damage roll when you make an attack with this weapon. You must declare you are doing so prior to your attack roll. So this one is worded slightly weird. You may spend 1 flare point to deal an additional 2d8 force damage on each damage roll when you make an attack with this weapon. You must declare you are doing so prior to your attack roll. Because it says each damage roll, it applies that this can apply to multiple damage rolls, but it doesn't give it doesn't give an indication as far as how long it lasts. So there's no end to this. And it also says you have to declare doing so prior to your attack roll. So this isn't like a Paladin Smite where it says when you hit a creature, you can smite. And one of the things Paladins do all the time is anytime they crit, they will always add smite damage on because it doubles the smite damage. This, you can't do that. You have to declare you're doing so prior to your attack roll. But because it says each damage roll, it almost sounds like you have to do it before your first attack roll. But if you're using extra attack, or if you're using corpse and extra attack, it would mean you would get 2d8 force damage on each attack, each damage roll for that. So it's worded really, really poorly. What I think it's meant to be is when you make an attack roll, you can burn a flare point to add extra damage if you hit. You have to declare you're doing so before you make the attack roll itself. So the way it should be worded, if that's the way it's designed to work, is it should start off with, when you make an attack roll, you may spend 1 flare point to deal an additional 2d8 force damage if you hit on that attack roll. You must declare you're doing so prior to your attack roll. That would make it work the way I think it's intended. The way it's written right now, it doesn't make sense. Because it doesn't actually define, does this work for once? Does it work until the end of your turn? Does it work for a minute? And rules lawyers would argue that the each damage roll means that it lasts at least until the end of your turn, which turns this into a massively powered thing. Because that effectively means if you make 2 attacks, that's an extra 2d8 force damage. That's the equivalent of like a 2nd level spell. If you use Corpse to Corpse, that is an additional 3d8 damage on top of an additional 1d8 damage you get from Corpse to Corpse and anything else you might get from concentration spells that add additional damage on the hit and magic weapons. Enchanted Blade would effectively mean the only spells you ever use with this as a sword dancer are going to be spells that increase your damage per hit effectively. And you're generally not going to use anything else, which for a full caster doesn't make sense, especially with acceleration and things like that. So yeah, I think what it should say is when you make an attack roll, you may spend 1 flare point to deal an additional 2d8 force damage if you hit with that attack, and you must declare you are doing so prior to your attack roll. That gives you everything you need. It means that it's not just a Paladin Smite by another name. It does make it different from that. And it gives you a lot of reasons to use it in certain situations and not use it in others. So yeah. So, final thoughts. Overall, I like the Sword Dancer. It's interesting. The hypermobility aspect is going to be undervalued by some people that look specifically to just dealing damage, and that's okay. They are going to be playing characters in a significantly more limited way, and it will be really, really easy to kind of nerf their characters by simply making combat where your ability to move is a very useful thing. I will say this, as I've said many times before, do not underestimate additional movement speed. It is always useful, especially in the hands of a really intelligent player. So that being said, it's interesting. Like I mentioned before, Heroic Charm probably needs, you must take you must use the second roll if you don't want to kind of slow down the game to a crawl. But because it's only on charisma checks and not saving throws, maybe Soren, you don't want that. It's entirely up to you. That's just how it works with everything else. And then with Enchanted Blade, it needs to be reworded because the way it's worded right now, it's really confusing and implies that it's a really much more powerful ability than I think it was intended, and kind of breaks the class. But overall, yeah, it's cool. It definitely encourages you to use a lot more melee attacks, and will actually encourage your spell choice as well, because any abilities that are going to improve, or any spells that are going to improve your ability to do melee attacks in general, are going to be useful for you. So, yeah. Otherwise, that is going to be all for me today. As always, just a reminder, like, subscribe, and turn notifications on in the comments down below. What are your opinions of the kind of Corpse to Corpse Displacement kind of combo? Because both take bonus actions, you cannot use them on the same turn. Would you like one of them to turn into an action so that you can use both on the same turn, where you come in and then you roll out really quick? What are your thoughts on that? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, That is all for me today, and I will see you guys the next time. All right? Bye-bye.